October 16th, 1945. The rain has not stopped for days. Gray mist crawls across the ridges, swallowing everything in silence, except the metallic grind of treads and the hiss of mud. A column of American Sherman tanks pushes forward through the ruined sugarcane fields. Their olive-drab armor is caked in grime, their engines straining under the climb. Behind them, soaked Marines move cautiously, rifles raised, eyes scanning the shattered terrain. Ahead, a Japanese machine gun nest opens fire. Muzzle flashes rip through the mist. Bullets spark against the lead Sherman. The tank halts, unsure where the fire is coming from. For a heartbeat, both sides freeze. Then, a Marine breaks cover. He runs through the rain, slams against the rear of the tank, and grabs a small black handset fixed to the armor, a field telephone. "Bunker, 11 o'clock, 30 yards, he shouts. Inside, the crew adjusts instantly. The turret rotates, the gun elevates, and a 75mm shell thunders into the hillside. The bunker disappears in an orange blast. Hidden Japanese officers watching from a nearby cave stare in disbelief. The enemy's tanks now listen to their infantry. What once was chaotic is now coordinated. And for the first time, they are terrified. In the early years of the Pacific War, tanks were never meant to rule the battlefield. The islands were too small. The jungles were too thick. The beaches were too narrow. For both the Japanese and the Americans, it was the infantryman, not the machine, who carried the burden of conquest. When U.S. Marines first landed at places like Guadalcanal in 1942, their tanks were slow, vulnerable, and often blind. Japanese defenders, trained in stealth and ambush, quickly learned how to turn terrain into a weapon. They buried mines under volcanic sand, set up anti-tank guns in coral bunkers, and waited for American armor to overextend. The tanks advanced. The infantry lagged behind. Between them, silence. If a tank spotted a bunker, it fired blindly. If infantry needed support, they had to wave, shout, or bang on armor with rifle butts, hoping to be heard over the roar of engines. More often than not, they weren't. At Tarawa in November 1943, this silence cost lives. As the first waves of Marines landed under withering fire, tanks tried to push forward through coral reefs and seawalls, but the men on foot were cut down. Miscommunication left Shermans isolated. Japanese defenders swarmed them with explosives. Several tanks were destroyed within minutes, their crews never even seeing the Marines they were meant to protect. For the Japanese, this pattern was familiar. Their doctrine, Jisensha Taisaku, anti-tank tactics developed since Manchuria, relied on fragmentation grenades, mines, and suicide assaults. Against an uncoordinated opponent, it worked. A tank, separated from infantry, was just a target waiting to die. But the Americans adapted. Slowly, painfully. By mid-1944, after the horrors of Tarawa, Bougainville, and early Saipan fighting, U.S. commanders recognized a consistent truth. Their greatest enemy wasn't Japanese courage. It was disconnection. Radio sets were unreliable, heavy, and rare. Infantry phones were non-existent. Coordination depended on hand signals, colored smoke, and prearranged timings, methods easily lost in chaos. In the jungles of New Guinea and the marshes of Leyte, tank units began to improvise. Some welded wooden boxes on their rears, where infantry could shout commands through small openings. Others experimented with field telephones scavenged from artillery units, connected to the tank's intercom wiring by makeshift cables. These crude solutions were unofficial, even frowned upon by some officers, but they worked. Reports began to circulate of infantry and tank crews communicating effectively for the first time, calling out targets, marking safe paths and directing suppressive fire in real time. For the men on the ground, it was revolutionary. Meanwhile, Japanese forces clung to older patterns. Their tanks, like the Type 97 Chiha, were thinly armored and undergunned, designed more for infantry support than armored duels. Their doctrine prioritized infiltration, ambush, and courage over coordination. Orders often traveled by runners or flags. They fought with ferocity, but against a mechanized, adaptive enemy, ferocity alone began to fail. By late 1944, the Pacific battlefield had changed. The Americans were no longer an invading force struggling to survive. They were an industrial machine of learning, refining, improving, evolving. Each new landing brought lessons written in blood. Each island became a classroom. And from the beaches of Saipan to the hills of Luzon, a new concept was born: combined arms, true cooperation between tanks and infantry, the machine and the man working as one. The next challenge was how to make that cooperation permanent, not improvised, not dependent on luck or yelling through mud and fire. Somewhere in the back of an engineer's notebook, a simple idea began to form: a phone, a wire, and a way for the infantry to speak directly to the crew inside the tank. A small change, but one that would soon rewrite how wars were fought. By late 1944, the Pacific had become a laboratory of war. Every island, every beachhead, every patch of jungle was a test site for the U.S. military's relentless drive to innovate. The idea of mounting a phone on the back of a tank was born not from a grand design meeting, but from desperation in the field. Reports from Saipan and Guam told the same story again and again. Infantry needed direct contact with tank crews. They needed a voice inside the armor. On the European front, similar frustrations had already surfaced. American armored units in France had begun experimenting with small junction boxes wired into the Sherman's intercom circuit, allowing infantrymen to plug in and speak directly with the tank commander. The results were immediate: faster target acquisition, fewer friendly fire incidents, and vastly improved coordination in tight terrain. Someone in the Pacific Command took notice. In early October 1944, during preparations for the invasion of Leyte, engineers of the U.S. Army's Ordnance Department began adapting this European innovation for tropical warfare. It was called the infantry-tank telephone, officially the Tank Infantry Communication Equipment AN/VRC-3 in technical manuals, though soldiers simply called it the talk box. It was a small, rugged handset, mounted inside a weatherproof metal casing at the rear of a Sherman. A short coiled wire led to the tank's internal intercom system. When plugged in, a foot soldier could speak directly to the crew inside. He didn't need to climb on the tank or shout through the engine noise. He could just lift the receiver and say, "Target in that tree line. 2 o'clock." The first units equipped with these phones landed on Leyte, October 20th, 1944. There, in the rain-soaked rice paddies and tangled jungle, the system proved its worth. Infantry and tankers began to function as a single organism. Soldiers could call for covering fire instantly, and tank commanders could warn of hidden mines or ambushes. Reports from the 44th Tank Battalion described the devices as indispensable. But for the Japanese defenders, this new level of coordination was something entirely alien. Their doctrine emphasized the spiritual unity of the soldier, not the technological one. Orders moved through voice, gesture, or intuition, not through electronics. As American forces advanced through Leyte and later Luzon, Japanese officers began to notice something disturbing. The enemy's tanks no longer hesitated. They no longer paused at crossroads or reacted slowly to ambushes. Infantrymen and tanks now responded to each other instantly, like one creature with shared instincts. Captured diaries and post-war interrogations reveal their unease. One Japanese officer on Luzon wrote, "The enemy armor does not stop. They move as if guided by invisible wires. Infantry point, tank fires. Our positions vanish before we can adjust." The invisible wires he described were quite literal. By 1945, nearly every Sherman operating in the Pacific carried an infantry telephone, standardized, durable, and battle-proven. Tank crews even began painting small signs on the rear plates. "Infantry phone, use me." It was a rare glimpse of humility in the machinery of war, an invitation from steel to flesh. On Okinawa, where the U.S. 10th Army prepared for the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific, every armored battalion was equipped with these phones. Infantry were trained to use them instinctively. Before the invasion, Marines practiced in mock villages on Saipan, rehearsing how to call out bunker coordinates, adjust firing arcs, and time assaults using the new communication link. Tank commanders learned to trust the voices outside their armor, to act as extensions of the infantry instead of independent hunters. The result would redefine island warfare. For the Japanese defenders entrenched on Okinawa, veterans hardened by years of jungle fighting, the American advance would appear incomprehensible. Tanks and infantry no longer stumbled separately through mud and smoke. They flowed together. Each movement supported, each strike premeditated. The war was no longer about who could shout the loudest through chaos. It was about who could speak and be heard. And as spring of 1945 dawned over Okinawa, the Japanese army would learn that lesson in the most devastating way possible.